Hey everyone.
Hi there, folks.
This is Amanda.
And this is Rita.
And you're listening to
I Don't Know Her,
the podcast where we talk about women.
And some other folks.
That you didn't know about.
But today you will.
It's going to be a great time.
It is.
Did you listen to our podcast back on 1.25 or 1.5 speed? Because I did.
It speeds things up a little bit.
Speeds things up. It was an hour and 40 minutes, but I feel like it was a good hour and 40 minutes. Mm-hmm. It was a good one. Speaking of an hour and 40 minutes, we watched the Framing Britney doc.
Okay, so I've heard of it. I think it came up in like my Hulu recommended for you. Have not watched it yet.
It's really well done. As someone who was like, for me, I'm really into celebrity gossip and all that really garbage bullshit. Mm-hmm. So
page 6.
Most of it wasn't like new to me or anything. It wasn't like stuff I had never seen or heard. There was some new stuff, I will say that. But for the most part, it was like stuff I knew about, but like had known about over the course of a full ass decade. To see it all shoved into a 90-minute documentary really like highlighted how fucking shitty the media, men, everyone,
her family
toward her. It was really eye-opening in a way that was enraging.
You feel like kind of similar in the way about the Jessica Simpson book, like how you felt about that?
Yes, however, I would say much more extreme. I mean, as you know, Britney was a much bigger deal.
Oh, she was everything in our, growing up. It was all about her.
I hated her growing up.
I listened to her music.
I did when I got older, actually. But when she first came out, I was just mad.
I thought it was fun, and like that first song, the one in the Catholic school uniform.
Yeah. Hit me, baby.
Yeah.
One more
gosh,
time.
Dancing to that at school dances and stuff. And then one of my best friends in high school, he was so gay, he didn't even know he was gay. And he was like, the new Britney CD came out, and we listened to it like on repeat, 15 times. And so it was a fun highlight of me growing up.
Yeah, I wish I could feel that way. When she first came out, I was really into grunge music and heavy metal, and so a lot of that is pretty misogynistic. I mean, everything was in the 90s.
Oh, heck yes.
And so, I was sort of conditioned that it was not cool, L7 was cool. Britney was not cool. Because Britney
I was into both.
Well, eventually I was too. I really got into Britney actually when I was in college. Probably because I spent more time clubbing, and so it wasn't just music that shitty girls I didn't like played really loudly in their stupid cars that I didn't get to drive. Just a twinge of jealousy there. So, I think that my perception of her changed as I got older, especially as I also loosened up my sort of rigidity when it came to music. I was very oh, this is the only kind of cool music, and if you listen to anything outside of this, you listen to uncool music, and that means you're uncool.
I felt, this for me was R&B. I did not like the early 90s R&B because I was into the whole grunge thing too. But it was so weird that I liked the Britney Christina stuff, but then the Boys to Men and things like that, I was I was not into that.
See, I was really into Boys to Men, TLC, Mariah Carey, all that stuff when I was young, and then I moved into just straight up rock, and that was the only thing I listened to. But one of the things that came to fruition in this documentary was how she was really kind of a surprise in terms of her popularity, because at the time it was all about boy bands, and a solo girl just did not have the kind of clout that a boy band did. And so her becoming as famous as she did was pretty monumental. And then the media descends,
tearing her to pieces.
Yes. And again, none of this was like stuff I wasn't aware of at the time, but I didn't have that thing where it accumulated, you know? And there was this interview when she's like, I don't know, 19, 20, where they're asking her about her sex life, whether or not she's had breast implants. I mean, the audacity.
Yeah.
And they're not sugarcoating it. They're not like trying to be all euphemistic or whatever. They just straight up are like, have you had a boob job? You know what's on everybody's mind, Britney? Your breasts.
Gosh, I would be mortified.
Yeah, and then she just has to smile and continue talking. Like, they didn't just degrade her entire existence down to her breasts. Mm-hmm. Oh, it was really awful to watch. And then it just got worse. Like, it just got continuously worse. And I will say one of the things that came out of that was a deep and unabiding hatred of Justin Timberlake I now have.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't really think about it. But do you remember when he debuted his solo album and the first single off of it was Cry Me a River?
Yeah, and the video, there's a girl in there that looks like it is dressed like blonde hair, and she used to wear the fedoras, and so the girl from image alone looks like Britney.
Yeah, the implication is that it's her.
Yeah.
And do you remember what the storyline of that was?
Of the song? Not really.
Yeah, the storyline was that she had cheated on him. And I remember that at the time. I thought it was juicy gossip. But I didn't take into consideration what that then meant for how she was treated. And there's a lot more to it, like stuff he said in magazine articles. And, you know, she had talked about her virginity prior to them being together. And then when they broke up, you know, he's like, people are like, we have to ask, did you fuck Britney? And he's like talking about their sex life on radios, you know, programs and stuff. It was really awful. And like, we'll never forgive him for the Janet Jackson Nipplegate shit. Mm-hmm. And this was just a further reason why, like, that guy was absolute trash at that point in time. He was trash. And he continues to be trash. I have no space now for Justin Timberlake in my life.
Jeez.
I highly recommend watching it because I think that it's easy for us to, I guess, sort of dismiss the concerns of people who we perceive as having everything.
And also they are celebrities. They're not real to us in a way. And so it's easy to chop them up. It's easy to, you know, she's this. She's rich and she's famous, whatever. She's, you know, sweep it under the rug kind of thing. The primary thing that it's talking about, in addition to her life, but the real reason why they're even having this conversation about her life and what she did in her career and how the media treated her is because of the conservatorship that she's under, that she's still under. It's her father, right?
Yes, her father is her conservator, and he therefore has the right to tell her what she can do both with her body and with her money. Mm-hmm. And it's really upsetting and degrading. And
she's like trapped in her house, right?
Yes, he can decide whether or not she has a phone, whether or not she can send a text or an email. He can limit her contact. Like if you want to come visit her, you have to permission from him first. And that is not unusual if a person is completely incapable of making those kinds of choices for themselves. I would say like someone who, you know, has lost like perhaps mental capacity in some way, maybe from dementia or some kind of brain accident or something like that, where they have at one point were able to take care of themselves and now they no longer are able to. Then it would make sense. Like this person is really vulnerable to being swindled and taken, right?
Yeah, and you want to protect that.
You want to protect that. But he is at the same time making her do, you know, Vegas residencies and perform. Well, if she's able to remember complex choreography, make choices, perform every night, engage with fans, run her Instagram account, and make you millions of dollars, she is not that fucking vulnerable.
Yeah.
And you know what's interesting is that she has not been, at least in the recent times, has not been arguing against the conservatorship in general. She's not saying, I want it to end. She's saying, I want it to be handled by a bank, a third-party entity that isn't my father.
Mm-hmm. Who has a vested interest in her.
In her money, especially.
Yeah.
And you know what's kind of shitty is that her lawyers are being paid by her. His lawyers are being paid by her. So everybody has a vested interest in keeping the conservatorship because they're all being paid by it.
Mm-hmm. And he's probably got a taste for money now because he's been putting her in show business since she was 6.
Well, that's another interesting thing in the documentary because it is very clear that he was not a part of her life.
What?
He was basically absent most of her life.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, her mother, Lynn, was very involved, which I knew. Her mom was like a stage mom. Her mom was very involved in her life and in the business. And then that's why I've always found it weird. I was like, why did her dad come and take over? You know, especially because I think at some point he had filed bankruptcy for himself.
Oh, shit. That's, I think, speaks volumes.
I think it does. You're going to tell me that this person who couldn't manage their own personal finances is in charge of a millionaire's finances?
Yeah.
That seems not great.
No. Where's her mother?
That's the thing I kept wondering is like, why wasn't it Lynn then?
Yeah, because I remember watching her in her career and her mom was always in the background. Mm-hmm. She was there while she was walking a carpet. She was physically, you could see her. She was there.
Yeah, and when she first came out, she did a lot of interviews with Britney.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what happened there. I don't know if there was a falling out or what, but recently, the most recent court case, her mom joined the fray as well and was also on Britney's behalf saying, the situation with her father is not great. Like, they don't get along anymore. There's no secret here. I'm here to also advocate for the trust to move into a bank instead of her father.
Yeah, it seems like something got fucked.
It's wild to me that in the United States in 2021, an able-bodied, able-minded multimillionaire who can walk, talk, think, act for herself is under a conservatorship that is generally reserved for the elderly and people who've had severe injuries and severe disabilities. And we're watching her be manipulated by this, and that would never happen to a man. Like, if let's flip the coin and say it was Justin Timberlake. Can you imagine this happening to him?
No.
Let's talk about, who was somebody who recently kind of lost it a little publicly was, what's his face from SNL. Oh, I can't remember his name. I can see his face. He was in The King of Staten Island, and he dated Ariana Grande.
Covered in tattoos?
Yes. What's his name?
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, but that guy had like kind of he's been open about having, troubles with mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And he had like a pretty public sort of meltdown.
He did.
But nobody was like, what we need to do is put him under a conservatorship and follow his every move. You know what I mean? So, and the only reason he was even as well known and followed and had paparazzi up his ass all the time as he was because he was dating Ariana Grande.
Oh, yeah. He was dating, the hottest star of the moment.
And so I cannot imagine that the tables being turned on an extremely successful male pop star being watched and monitored by their father. That just wouldn't happen.
It wouldn't happen.
And to be allowed to go on, because that's the other thing, is that conservatorships usually are lifted if the person is capable of like making a living. Mm-hmm. They lift it.
And I've peeked at her Instagram and she's like every single video she posts, she's in one room. Like, she posts from the same room all the time. And just her yard or the front of her house or the back of the house. Like, you can see it's the same.
Yeah, the same area.
All the time.
I think that's probably because she doesn't want to run into her dad.
Jeez.
The whole thing is very wild. I think it does bring up a lot of issues that we talk about on the show about women and having autonomy and the way that we kind of manipulate a woman's image. You know, like we talked about with Rosa Parks and Claudette Colvin last week.
Mm-hmm.
We have this tendency to manipulate women's images without their consent. And that's definitely happened to her. I highly recommend watching it for everybody who listens to the show because you'll find it infuriating and also fascinating.
I like a good documentary and I like new information, so definitely can check it out.
Well, and it's done by the New York Times. So it has it's not some sensationalist garbage. It's got real stuff in it and real interviews, and they're really interesting.
All right, I'm going to have to check it out.
So, who do you have for me?
Cecilia Chiang.
That name is very familiar.
I feel like you're going to know who this is.
Who is she?
Restaurateur, chef, writer, and pioneer in bringing traditional Chinese food and table traditions to the U.S.
I think I do. Is she in Los Angeles?
San Francisco.
Okay. All right. I maybe don't then. Because I was thinking about this episode of Top Chef where I think it was All Stars, but they all went to like the oldest dim sum restaurant.
Oh.
Maybe it was in San Francisco, but I thought it was LA. All right, hit me because I love a good foodie.
Cecilia was born Sun Yun in southern Jiangsu province in eastern China on September 18th, 1920. She was one of 12 children.
Ooh, that's a lot.
9 girls and 3 boys. You imagine that?
It's a lot of girls.
Imagine having 8 sisters.
No.
I had 3 and that wasn't enough.
And 2
Love
brothers.
you.
2 brothers?
2 brothers, 3 sisters.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot of hair pulling. Her family was very successful and wealthy. Her father, Sun Long, was a railway engineer who had earned his education in France. And her mother, Sun Xie Yunhui, was the daughter of a wealthy family who owned textile and flour mills. So they were rich as fuck. They had a ton of money.
Sounds like they were living good.
At the age of 4, her family moved to Beijing, and she was raised in a 52-room Ming Dynasty-style mansion. Yeah, that is money.
52. What do you even do with all those rooms? What could you possibly have 52 rooms
This
to
is
do
our
with?
staring room. This is where we stare.
We have a special room to capture farts.
There you go.
Sorry, I've been around teenagers all day.
And this house was complete with a full staff and 2 full-time cooks. So growing up, she didn't have to cook, and actually she was told to stay away from the kitchen. While the cooks were preparing meals, her mother would supervise how everything was prepared, and she dictated how she wanted things done. Cecilia would sneak peeks and listen to the directions that her mother gave and how the cooks followed suit. Her mother would constantly be like shooing her away. Like, you're not supposed to be in here. Don't do that. Her mother was very tough. She was very strict, but Cecilia said that she cared deeply for her children, her home, and she showed it. Her father was, as she put it, open-minded. He was gentle, willing to talk with his children. Not usually how things were done in China at the time. The mom kind of ran the house and the dad was a little bit more on the softer side. One example of how her family set aside the norm at the time was that women of wealth and status usually practiced foot binding.
Yeah.
And it's where they break and shape the feet so that they're smaller. And her mother had actually been through this process.
Yikes.
So it was very painful for her to walk at times. And her mother and father refused to do this to any of their 9 daughters.
Thank God.
Which also that wasn't really done. That was, something that they were if they wanted to like elevate their status. You know, people usually want to marry off their daughters, and this was something that was seen as attractive, but they didn't care.
Well, I'm glad they didn't. I mean, they'll live much happier, healthier lives without having their feet broken.
Her parents also insisted on an education for all their daughters. All 9 girls and 3 boys received a college education. The entire family would gather for elaborate formal dinners. In her future success in the restaurant business, she credits these family dinners as part of her success. She said every dish was carefully prepared and presented, and it wasn't just food, it was an atmosphere and an experience that went with it, which I honestly love, when you get to have an experience with food and not just sit there and be eating one single dish. Traditionally, her father was sat first so that he could eat alone before the whole family was sat. But the kids would like poke their heads into the dining room and they would snicker and like kind of like fall on the floor. And so their dad would eventually be like, okay, come on in. And he would like give them little bites so they could all try like what he was eating. Cause they're all looking and seeing, like Cecilia would say, what are you eating? You know? And so he'd give them little bites and like little sips of wine. And it was her first experience with food was kind of fun and light and playful. And growing up, she said she was very well taken care of. And looking back on her childhood, she said it was a dream. It was really nice.
Well, I would imagine if you have 52 rooms and a nice dad, that's pretty much all you could ask for.
So jumping ahead to 1937, Japan bombed Shanghai when Cecilia was finishing up college, leading into the Japanese occupation of China. Her family decided to flee. So Cecilia and one of her older sisters traveled hundreds of miles, mostly by walking.
Oh, dear.
To the city of Shangyu, where they sought shelter with relatives. At this point in time, the family's broken up and they lose track of each other. So some siblings went some places, some went others, and she didn't even know where her parents went.
Well, and you said she was born in 1820, so she's about 17.
Yeah.
And obviously she wasn't the firstborn. So there are some who are in their 20s and whatnot. So I think that's reasonable that they would
send
go do
an
their
older
own
one
thing.
with, yeah. And I believe she was the 7th. She was the 7th child of the 12.
So yeah, there are quite a few of them then that are older.
In an NPR article written by Neda Ulabi, Cecilia had stated that her and her sister were robbed multiple times on their journey. They had to hide out of sight from Japanese warplanes. And their journey took them 6 months to travel. And she, like, looking back on it, 2 girls going on their own during this wartime, she didn't realize it at the time, but it was very brave.
Yeah, and dangerous.
While she was in Shangyu, she was able to get a job teaching Mandarin at American and Soviet embassies. And while working at the embassies, she met and married a man named Xiang Lang, who was a former economics professor, and he had become like a really successful businessman. I'm not quite sure what business he was in, though.
And was he, because she worked at the American and Soviet embassies, is he American or Soviet, or is he Chinese?
He was Chinese.
Okay.
The couple relocated to Shanghai. They had 2 children, May and Philip, and they just made a very comfortable life together. Like, once again, you know, her husband's successful. She's working as well. They're pretty set. But that didn't last long. They had to flee China altogether this time when the Chinese Communist Revolution began. So they ended up settling in Tokyo, Japan, and that's where they lived for the next 10 years. During this time, she and her husband decided to open a restaurant in Tokyo, offering traditional Chinese dishes for other Chinese expats who had relocated to Japan as well. And this restaurant was called the Forbidden City. And actually, I could not find a lot of information on Forbidden City. I couldn't even find out like when they opened, how long they were open. All I could find out was they were successful. It did do well. And it seemed like from the interviews that I listened to with her that it was more of a financial and like managerial role that she played.
Okay.
Or her and her husband, more so than actually working in the restaurant. In 1960, she had a sister that had wound up in San Francisco and had just lost her husband to cancer. her sister was able to find Cecilia and make contact with her and told her that she needed her. She was like, my husband just died. Like, I need to make funeral arrangements. I'm alone. She needed support. So Cecilia obtained a 3-month visa and she headed to the States by herself. She left her family behind. And this was her sister, Sophie. She reunited with her. She's thrown into the U.S. scene. This is San Francisco. This is the first time she's seen Chinatown in the U.S. She's shocked. You know, it's not like home. And her sister takes her out to eat in Chinatown. And everything is way different from what she remembers of seeing at home. And she was like, this is Chinese food. And her sister's like, this is all we can get.
This is Americanized Chinese food.
This is Americanized Chinese food. So one day while they're walking through Chinatown, she runs into 2 friends that she knows from Tokyo. These friends were opening a restaurant together and they needed help to talk to the landlord of the building because their English was really rough. And Cecilia was like, I don't speak English any better than you do. Like, why do you think I can do it? And they were like, just please help us. You know, you speak more than we do.
Well, I mean, she used to teach Mandarin to English and Soviet kids.
Yeah.
So she must have had passable English.
She's a very generous person. She wanted to be helpful. So she goes with her friends to talk to the landlord. And during this chat, the landlord says that if he doesn't get a check then and there, that he's going to sell to somebody who's waiting to rent the space. And her friends panic. They don't even know what checks are. And they're like, well, we don't have it. And so Cecilia has checks. So she ends up writing a check for $10,000.
Oh my God.
And
Who has $10,000?
She does.
Just write a check for it. Oh my Lord.
She gives it to the landlord to secure the location on the understanding that she thought if it fell through, she'd get her money back.
So naive.
I know. A little while later, the friends decide to back out. They were like, never mind.
Oh, these were not good friends.
No, and I've never had a friend leave me on a line like that.
Oh, not for that much.
Not for that much.
I don't, honestly, I think I've probably had like maybe $100 here or there. I've never given anybody like a considerable, I've never had enough money to give anybody a considerable amount of money.
That's what, I don't have any money to give.
We are currently recording in a studio that we made out of moving blankets, okay?
And it's fantastic.
It's working just fine. But nonetheless, it's moving blankets.
Yeah, so her friends leave her high and dry, which is like, that's really shitty. And then she realizes this is a non-refundable deposit on the restaurant space.
Yeah, usually that's how that works.
Yeah, which I feel like this landlord probably knew that.
Yeah.
And he took advantage. So she had never opened her own spot alone before. She didn't want to lose her money. And she was like, I'm just going to go for it. She's like, I have no choice. I'm just going to try. And she said part of it was because she was really scared that her husband was going to find out that she spent $10,000 and that she lost it. And didn't even try.
Wait. Wasn't when the check was cashed, was that just like a clue? Didn't he notice?
I don't know. This might come up later in the story. So what she said is she decided, I'm going to do well first and then I'll tell him later. She was really worried that he was just going to like lose his shit. So at this point, I'm going to talk a little bit about Chinese food and the history of it in San Francisco just to get a whole kind of roundabout where they're at the moment.
I am very excited about this because I know a little bit about Chinese food from cooking shows and Top Chef and things like that. But I don't feel that I've had authentic Chinese food ever in my life.
Neither do I.
I've only had Americanized Chinese food.
I feel the same way.
Yeah. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about Chinese food in Montana. Let me have a second.
So the first Chinese immigrants came to San Francisco during the gold rush. Some of these first people found work as miners, traders, grocers, and cooks. As more and more Chinese people immigrated to the U.S., the demand for food that reminded them of home was wanted, which makes sense. Chinese food houses that opened in the late 19th century were known for serving traditional dishes. And these food houses were often, it was like you were coming into somebody's home. They were very hospitable, very kind, very professional. The way that the dishes would come out was almost like as what we would call in the US now coursed out dishes, like a little bit more formal dining. And the food that they served was like a far cry from what would be the food that is Chinese food now in America. As the gold rush started to dwindle, of course, you probably know anti-Chinese sentiment grew deeply. As Americans began to suffer, they turned on the Chinese, lowering their wages, not allowing them to be hired, not allowing them to own their own business, and creating a mining tax that was for foreigners only. And then the U.S. government eventually passed the Chinese Exclusion Act.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you write about that at all, the Chinese Exclusion Act?
That was the barring of any more Chinese people being able to come to the U.S.
Yeah. Did it also include any restrictions on Chinese people who were already here?
I think the taxation and the limits of them being able to find work and stuff was the way of keeping them down here. The ones that were already here in the States. The Exclusion Act, I think, was just closing the door altogether.
Okay. Because I can't remember. I just read about it actually not that long ago. I think when I was talking about our gymnast, or no, sorry, our diver who became the first Asian American to win a gold medal. I was reading a little bit about that, but it was not related to her, so I didn't retain the information because she was not Chinese. She was Filipino.
I think too, like the discrimination of like not being able to like be able to get into a home, not being able to, you know, go into certain locations to buy food was just basically like trying to get them to go back.
Yeah, and it's segregation.
Absolutely.
In a different form.
And this prejudice carried over to how the U.S. responded to Chinese food, a cuisine that was once no problem with them because the Chinese food houses were really popular with the miners. I mean, it was really good, filling stuff. It was a comfortable environment. And now they labeled it as like dirty, smelly, poor. In Congress, a senator said, his name was James Blaine, "You cannot work with a man who must have beef and bread next to a man who can possibly live on rice."
What the fuck?
Yeah.
It's like 70% of the world lives on rice, buddy.
And it was definitely just the villainization of these people, which as we've seen time and time again.
I'm sure you did when you were a kid. Did you watch the old timey like Bugs Bunny cartoons and stuff?
Oh, yeah. When you're like, as, you know, a parent, I was like, oh, let's watch some Bugs Bunny. It's really funny. And then seeing some stuff, I'm like, holy shit, we're turning this off.
Yeah. Holy shit. This is racist.
Racist as fuck.
Yeah. Walt Disney had a real big problem with Asian folks.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
very clear. It was really bad. So much like
blatant.
Yeah. And that was the Warner. I think Bugs Bunny was the Warner Brothers, but like it was everywhere. There was just anti-Chinese sentiment. And of course, after World War II, also anti-Japanese sentiment. It was not great.
No, it was horrible.
And of course, anybody who looked like, so there was this like pan-Asian issue. Not good.
Not good. At the turn of the 20th century, this is where Chinese food took a turn. To be able to make a living, chop suey restaurants began creating dishes that were Americanized and were way different from traditional food that they had once served. These are dishes like we're pretty familiar: almond chicken, chow mein, sweet and sour shrimp. These were the highlights, and a lot of the food became a lot sweeter and deep fried to appease American palates. Cecilia said that when she got to the U.S., she didn't know what any of it was, and that chop suey literally translates to odds and ends.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's an entire episode of Taste the Nation with Padma Lakshmi about chop suey and how it's not a real thing.
No.
And like all of these chop suey restaurants like came about so that white people would like eat their food.
Because they're trying to make a living, and this is what they had to do.
Yeah. And it's so wild. Like, it's just, first off, I didn't even know chop suey was a thing, except my parents would say it. Like, I had never, but almond chicken, orange chicken, you know, chicken chow mein, like all of that stuff was the stuff that I ate.
And she said too, like, you order by number. She's like, everybody just ordered numbers. And she's like, what the hell is that? Like, how does food just become a number?
I've always had a hard time with that. I want a number 17. I'm like, I don't even like ordering that because I'm like, what if they misheard me and they don't give me the number 17?
They give me the 20, you know. So she decided with her restaurant, she wanted to serve traditional Northern Chinese cuisine. She wanted to bring back the tradition of coursed out dining that her mother used to do. So she put together as best she could, and she did this by memory and taste alone, of creating dishes that she had that tasted like her mother's food that was on the table during her childhood. She also ran the place much like her mother. She ran the kitchen. She had no problem being a boss. She had no problem putting her foot down. She did hit a roadblock, though, when it came to working with vendors. Most of the suppliers were not willing to trust or work with her because she only spoke Mandarin and most of the vendors spoke Cantonese. And so for her speaking Mandarin, it was almost a red flag of them just wanting to shun her because it was just like, you're an other, you're not us. And of course they didn't like working with her because she was a woman.
Yeah. I was going to say there's a couple layers here.
Yeah. So despite all that, she opens up her 65-seat restaurant in 1962 and it's called The Mandarin. She was the manager and the janitor, she said, which I love. I know a lot of business owners that are like that. And she had a very small staff. She had 2 cooks, which were a husband and a wife, and she had a couple of waiters, and that was it for 65 seats.
Wow. Can you imagine?
Fucking nightmare. The dining room was designed to look like the mansion that she had grown up in. She lined the tables with linen. She had formal place settings, beautiful ornate light fixtures of gold and red, lush carpet, the works. She worried that her menu would be lacking. Like she was really worried that she was like someone wasn't going to be able to find something that they liked, which I can identify with because when I cook, I'm like, I make like a huge spread if people are coming over because I'm like, well, what if they don't like chicken? And what if they don't like broccoli or okay, so I'll make this over here and I'll make that over here. It's like, I feel the same way.
I think that's common. You know, you make so much food because you're like, well, that person can then not eat this thing.
Yeah.
And then they'll have that
Or
thing.
if they're gluten-free or something like that.
Was that a dig?
No.
That was a little bit of a dig.
So her menu had 200 dishes on it.
That's too many dishes.
It's too many dishes.
Can you imagine cooking 200 different dishes every day?
No.
No.
She admitted later that it was foolish. And she was like, I watched a documentary about her and she has an original copy of her first menu of the Mandarin and she's like holding it and she opens it and she's just laughing at it. She's just like, look at this shit. She's like, it's too much.
Oh my God. That would be really funny. Was the menu like a mile long?
So the menu was like, I'd probably say maybe 12 by 12, but it had those trifolds.
Oh.
So when you opened it, it like opened.
Going.
Yes. So her menu was something that no one had seen before. So these were the traditional Northern Chinese dishes that she had on there. She had minced squab in lettuce cups, tea smoked duck, beggar's chicken, which is a whole duck wrapped in lotus leaves, stuffed with dried mushrooms and water chestnuts, and it's baked in earthen clay. So they cover it in clay and then they bake it. And as they present it at the table, they invite a guest to crack it open and then they serve.
I think I've seen this. Like I've seen it done, but I obviously have never seen it in person.
She had a dish called mantao, which is steamed buns filled with lamb. Bao bing, which is a savory Chinese crepe. Szechuan eggplant and Mongolian lamb. And at first, customers were sparse. They didn't know what the hell it was.
What am I eating?
And then the customers that did come in complained about the price points. They were like, "Why isn't this $5?" You know, and she's like,
"It's lotus leaves, bitch.
It's not worth $5." Yes. So one day it changed. She noticed the dining room all of a sudden was full, and she didn't know why. And so she asked a patron how they had heard of her place, and they responded that they had read a review of her restaurant written by Herb Cain. One of her regulars had brought Herb to eat, and when she met him, she didn't know who he was, but Herb was a local journalist for the San Francisco Chronicle. And so when people are like, oh yeah, Herb Caen recommended your place. And she's like, who the fuck is Herb Caen? Yeah. He was the eyes and ears of the Bay Area for social and political happenings. Also, people said that he was the guy that could make or break your restaurant. And he had eaten at the Mandarin and was shocked at her presentation and the care that she put into her dishes. And so he wrote her like a glowing review. He said, this is a little hole in the wall that is serving some of the best Chinese food east of the Pacific. Like, it's totally. And he went there too with, what was the guy's name? Vic Bernard, who is the owner and founder of Trader Vic's.
I don't know what Trader Vic's.
It was like those famous tiki bar chains in California.
Oh, I don't really know, but I believe you.
But he went there with that guy. The Mandarin was now on the map as a must-try location. One of the things that customers loved as much as the food was the service. Her servers provided a fine dining style of service, and Cecilia would personally go around to her guests. She would go through the menu with you and describe items if you had any questions. She described the dishes, and she would help pick out items and the order that the courses should be eaten. So she'd be like, so you want to have the lamb as your entree. So we're going to start with this plum wine, and then you're going to go to a tea, and then this appetizer will go well with it. So ready your stomach for the lamb. And then you can finish with like this dessert or like sliced fruit, like all like the gastronomy of being able to digest properly.
You know what I find interesting is that like this reviewer, right, is the reason why everybody started flocking to her restaurant. That's still how we find restaurants. It may not be like reviews written in newspapers, although sometimes it is. But word of mouth is like the reason why people go to a restaurant.
If you have somebody that says, I had a great experience here, or I had this really delicious dish that you have to try, like 9 times out of 10, I go and try it out.
Yeah. I mean, how many times did you hear me talk about how good Wooden City was?
Oh, yeah. And then I finally had it.
Yeah.
And it was great.
It's so great. But like, I had heard it from someone else. Hey, Wooden City is really good. I've been waiting for them to open this whole time. And, like I can remember way back when we had this restaurant here in Spokane called Casper Fry that opened. And it was the first time we'd had elevated Southern cuisine in the city. And my God, it like blew my mind. It was so good.
It was so, I go there every year for my birthday.
Yeah, it was, well, not now, and obviously.
Oh yeah, the world's ended.
But that I went there because people kept talking about it. And, now I think that the reviews have moved more towards like Instagram. I follow a lot of foodie accounts like Eat Spokane and Spokane Gluten Free Eats. Oh yeah,
a foodie blogger is key. I was trying to find somewhere to find open air dining, and I was like, I know, like Spokane Eats. She knows everything. So I went to her page.
She'll write a whole list on where you can go. Yeah, we're doing open air dining here, guys. It's real fucking cold.
I went and had lunch at 22 degrees, and it was still amazing.
I had lunch by myself in like a drafty brewery, but I still felt like I was living a high life because it was the first time I'd gone out in so long.
Well, finding success, she wanted to stay in America. She worked really hard and she didn't want to just walk away. I think this may have caused a rift with her husband, not only about the money, but that she wanted to stay in the U.S. Because she ends up sending for her children and bringing them to the States, and her husband stays in Tokyo.
Oh.
Yeah. He never comes to the U.S., and they never officially divorce, but they separate.
So that's right. I forgot that she'd come by herself to be with her sister. That's why he never knew about the $10,000.
Yeah. Maybe he wasn't watching the checkbook.
Okay, so she gets her kids, they come, he stays, they get divorced.
No, they just separated, never legally
They never
divorced.
illegally divorced.
Yeah.
You know what? I have a friend right now who's trying to get, she married a Chilean man. They married in Chile, and then they also made their marriage legal in the States. So they had marriage certificates in both places. They divorced in the States years ago. but she's just now getting around to trying to like get the divorce legalized in Chile.
Oh.
And it's a motherfucking nightmare. And this is in 2021 when people have access to the internet.
Jeez.
You know, like she has to go to San Francisco because that's the nearest consulate to be able to finalize her divorce.
What?
And she doesn't know when. They just get to pick the time and be like, you need to be here on Thursday at 7 a.m. So she'll just have to get on a fucking plane.
And go to San Francisco.
And go to San Francisco at 7 a.m. on a Thursday. And so, I mean, and like, imagine, like it's pretty cheap right now to fly from Spokane to San Francisco, but normally that's probably not the case.
Who can just jump on a plane though? Like,
who can just drop their
life.
entire lives, get on a plane to sign some paperwork?
Some single 21-year-old dude.
So I can imagine that it would be very difficult then to finalize a divorce to somebody who you married in China, but they live in Japan now and you live in the United States.
Yeah. She does seem like a very traditional type person. So I wonder too if just divorce was not an option.
Yeah.
And just live separate lives. About 5 years pass, her restaurant is doing great, so much that she outgrows the space and she decides to move to a larger location. She opens up the new Mandarin in Ghirardelli Square, going from 65 seats to 300.
Oh my God. I can't even imagine going to, it's a concert venue. That is not a restaurant.
She took it up a notch and decorated her restaurant in refined and lavish Chinese decor. She also added a Chinese, I'm going to say this totally wrong, a cow rao, which is a grill where guests can either watch her cook on or they can sit around it and cook. So it's got a base. It's got like a ceramic round table and then the grill's in the middle and it's got a hood that comes from the ceiling. And so you can do like your own barbecue like on there and the guests can sit around it. And then she would do demonstrations where she would put out like all her mise en place and then she would cook something and then be able to serve it to people. So her new restaurant took about a little over $1 million to build.
In what year?
Oh, she's probably, so she opened up in 1962. This is 5 years, 1967.
Lucas McIntyre, you need to tell us. What was $1 million? $1 million in 1967 or whatever? What is that today? That's got to be like...
It's got to be like 7 mil by now.
Oh, are you kidding me? That's that's gotta be double digit millions. My guess, let's see if I'm right. My guess is 13 million.
$1 million in 1967 is the equivalent of $7,874,418.47 in current dollars. Points to Rita on that one.
So through the years, her restaurant becomes a hotspot for celebrities. She had regulars like Jack Nicholson, which she said Jack Nicholson was a fabulous tipper. He said he'd walk in and everyone would be like, can I have his table? Can I have his table? Because they just knew he was going to tip the shit out of them.
I like that he's a good tipper.
Freddie Mercury, Pavarotti, John Lennon, and Yoko Ono were also weekly regulars of hers. Bringing her traditions to the table was her ultimate goal, but she realized that if she didn't teach these practices, that they would not go on. She began to offer cooking classes and demonstrations. One of her fans was Chuck Williams of Williams-Sonoma. Yeah. His favorite dish was her beggar's chicken. He introduced Cecilia to a little-known man named James Beard.
Oh!
Who became a student of hers.
Shit! He
wanted to learn how to cook this authentic northern Chinese cuisine, so she took him as a private student.
Wow.
Yes. Julia Childs also took a liking to her and asked to become a student of Cecilia's as well. She also taught Alice Waters. I don't know if you know who that is.
I talked about Alice Waters.
You did? What was that on?
On the episode when we talked about Edna Lewis.
Yes.
Because she is credited as the one who brought the farm to table movement. And I was like, that's cute.
But
she borrowed it from Edna Lewis.
Well, Alice Waters was the head chef and owner of Chez Panisse in Berkeley, California. Alice and Cecilia actually became lifelong friends. In the late 1970s, she opened up a second Mandarin, this time in Beverly Hills. And in the 80s, she opened up the Mandarin Chinese Cafe, which she handed over to her son, Philip.
And are her daughters involved?
She has one daughter, one son.
Oh, that's right. One daughter, one son.
Her son, from what I was reading, was the one that was involved. He took over this cafe.
Okay.
I didn't hear much about her daughter.
Okay.
I know her daughter did marry. She had a family. She had a daughter herself, but it didn't really seem like she was in the restaurant industry.
Because I'm still convinced, because earlier I mentioned the chop suey thing being on Taste the Nation with Padma Lakshmi.
Mm-hmm.
I think that episode, she went and talked to Cecilia Chiang and her granddaughter.
Ooh, I'll have to check that out and see.
I think. I'm going to Google it as soon as you finish, because if you tell me she's dead, I'm wrong. Okay? So you keep going. It'll be a whole surprise for us both.
So during this next decade, she wrote her first book, much like Edna Lewis. It was a cookbook memoir called The Mandarin Way, detailing her life in northern China and her inspirations behind her food. She began traveling. Her restaurant was doing great. She was meeting all of these, renowned chefs, that she started getting curious about other cuisines, like French cuisine, Italian cuisine. So she began traveling with her friends. She traveled with Alice Waters too. They went to China and did like a 5-week tour of Chinese cuisine. And she was just kind of living like a really fun life. Because could you imagine just traveling and eating with your friends?
I could imagine it. Yes.
I could imagine that. Someday we'll do it.
That is honestly, that is the thing I would love to do. Like, I do want to go to beaches, but I want to go to the beaches and then go eat really good food. Like, that's the only thing I want to do.
That'd be
I want to go
ideal.
eat good food.
Good food.
Like, I pick places I want to visit mostly based on the food.
So do I. If I know we're going through somewhere, I do research to find out where to eat first.
Like my dream locations to go visit are based on food. Mm-hmm. Like, I want to go to France. I want to go to Japan. I want to go to Thailand because I want to eat their motherfucking food. The rest of the countries are beautiful. I'm sure I will enjoy hiking and doing sightseeing, but I will mostly enjoy the food.
The food.
And I will take photos of the food. I will talk about the food. Everybody will know what I ate.
She was also hired as a restaurant consultant. So a lot of people... she allowed other chefs and restaurant owners to pick her brain on how to start up their restaurant, how to be better restaurateurs. Because she had a lot. I mean, she had no idea how to run a restaurant to basically owning one of the best restaurants in the world.
Yeah.
So they wanted to know how she was able to figure that out. In 1991, at the age of 71, Cecilia was ready to retire. She sold the Mandarin. And also, her son Philip bought the Beverly Hills location from her. Her son Philip went on to find his own success. He's actually a co-founder of P.F. Chang's in 1993.
Whoa.
Yeah.
He be rich now.
So Cecilia Chiang is the Chiang in P.F. Chang's.
I was wondering that.
Yeah.
I was wondering that.
Yep.
And the what? And the what? And the what and the what?
The P is for the Philip, and then the F is for the other co-owner.
Wow. Okay. I'm gonna tell on Spokane a little bit.
Oh no.
So every year we have this great local paper, independent weekly called The Inlander. You may have seen us lobbying last year for the best local podcast on there. You should definitely, if that happens again, definitely vote for us. But when I first moved here, there was not a lot of great food.
It was me neither when I first moved
bad. Here. And when they would put out their best of issues, by and large, the best hamburger was like Red Robin, and best Chinese food was P.F. Chang's. And I was like, pack my bags. I gotta get the fuck out of this place. And P.F. Chang still makes the list like every year.
They do.
And I'm real sad about it.
I went there once.
Yeah, I've been there one time and it was here.
Yeah.
I've never been to a P.F. Chang's elsewhere.
Neither have I.
And again, one time. I think I ordered takeout from there one other time. But that is it. I mean, not to knock on Cecilia Chiang's. legacy and her son, you do you get that bang. But like, it's not the best Chinese food anywhere.
To me, I felt just her undying like drive to bring this tradition, but then her son has this chain. But I was wondering, like, is there something behind that chain? Like, is he also trying to be able to bring some of this food to the masses? I'm not sure, but I was kind of like a little miffed about it.
Yeah, I don't love
like
it.
Maybe he should have tried doing what she wanted, what she was doing.
Yeah, but you don't make as much money.
True. And it all does come down to money.
Yeah, in capitalist America.
Yeah. After this, she went on to write a second book called The Seventh Daughter, My Culinary Journey from Beijing to San Francisco in 2007. So this book, her second cookbook memoir, has some significance, and especially The Seventh Daughter. She ends up, after 30 years, she gets a letter from one of her sisters that is still in China. And she says, your father's really sick. Mm-hmm. And I just hope that you can come and see him. And at that point, her parents didn't know where she landed. Most of her siblings didn't know where she landed. And they, on the other side in the U.S., her and her sister Sophie didn't know what had happened to the rest of their family.
And they had no way to know?
No, because the communist revolution was going on and there was no way to get access to information.
Yeah, that would
They
be
had
right.
a really firm, tight fist on the area, especially northern China.
Yes.
So she is able to go back, and it's been 30 years. And she says when she walks into the airport, the first thing she sees is a line of the Red Army. And they're basically yelling, praise Chairman Mao, praise Chairman Mao. They have their red book, which is all of their instructions. She said basically it was their Bible, has a picture of Mao's face on it. They had a hat with Mao's face on it, and they had whips. Mm. And she just said, where am I? She was like, she did not recognize her home. So it'd
be so disheartening.
Yes. She asked, she was going to go see her father because he was very, very sick. And they stopped her at the door and they said, you can't leave yet. They said, because you are a foreigner, because she was coming from the States. Mm-hmm. They said, you have to stay in a room here, and then we will have someone come and get you tomorrow. So she had to stay there by herself. She didn't know if this was a lie or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the government had all control.
I mean, that's not the case now, but God, that would be terrifying.
Yeah, so she's led by these soldiers to a room, and she has to stay there. So she's able to leave, and she goes and finds her father. Her father's like in the shack, and she realizes, she learns about what happened to her family. So her family lost all their money. Her father said that one of her sisters had committed suicide because
died by suicide.
Yeah. And it was her sister's own daughter had turned her into the communist soldiers for like an infraction that she had done. And they had publicly humiliated her. They beat her. They tortured her. Oh. And so she just said, I don't have anything left. And so then that's what happened. One of her brothers was sent to a labor camp as a punishment because he was a teacher. And he had said something against the government. And they sent him there and he died there. And then she asked her father, where's our mother? And he said she had died 4 years ago. She didn't even know her mother was dead.
Oh, that would be so fucking heartbreaking.
So she only had 3 weeks to be there with her father. And he asked her if she could stay. And she tried to get an extension to stay longer. And she wasn't able to stay. They were like, no, you got 3 weeks and you got to go. And so her father, she has this like really intense, and in the interview that I watched of her speaking about this, she's just like emotionally broken. She's crying. And she just said, her father said, this is the last time we're going to see each other. So he was like, I have nothing left to give you or to say, but I love you. And he dies in front of her. Yeah. So then she is freaking out, and she tries to have people help her. Like, we got to get him to a hospital. Nobody has a vehicle. So they had to carry him to a hospital. And by the time that they get there, they just look at him and said, why are you wasting your time? He's dead.
Yeah.
And they throw his body in a mass grave. Yeah.
What?
They threw them in a mass grave and then they cremated them all together and said, you can have some of the ashes. And she was like, there's no point. So she didn't even get any ashes of her father.
Why didn't he get a proper like funeral or burial?
She just said they didn't care. They didn't care.
Oh my God, that's awful.
And so this whole thing about the seventh daughter was because when she was able to see her father again, that's what he called her.
Was the
seventh daughter. So this book, I feel like it has much more of her history and her background. Yeah. And I feel like she felt compelled because of what she saw and seeing her father die.
Yeah, I mean, that would be really traumatic and horrendous. Oh, how awful.
Yeah, and not even get to say goodbye to her mom.
Now I retract all of the snarky little comments I made about how rich they were.
Oh, and too, like her father said that for 2 years, like her father and mother were living on the street. And so like everything that they had was dwindled down to, she called it her tragedy of how things ended up. Because, and too, if she hadn't escaped to the U.S., she might have had the same fate or pulled her children out,
Yeah. Wow. That's really, that's sad. It's heartbreaking.
So this book, actually, she received a James Beard Foundation's Lifetime Achievement Award for in 2013. And the following year, there was a documentary made about her called Soul of a Banquet. This was by the director Wayne Wang. He was the director of The Joy Luck Club, which is one of my favorite movies.
I actually have never seen it and never read it.
Really?
Yeah.
It's good. It's sad, but it's good.
Yeah, I know there was the only reason I know anything about it at all is because I remember there was a lot of pushback from Asian folks about it.
Really?
But that is the extent of my recollection of that. I just remember reading criticism in film school, but I don't remember it. So maybe we'll talk about that someday.
The film is full of candid interviews with Cecilia talking about how she began, discussing her love of food with her best friend, Chef Alice Waters. It also documents Cecilia putting together a small banquet in the celebration of the 40th anniversary of Alice's restaurant, Chez Panisse. Even at the age of 98, she's going out and she's eating and hanging out with friends. Food and friends, she said. That was one of her favorite things, which is also one of my favorite things.
Mine too. That's why this is such a hard thing, this pandemic.
PBS released a 6-part series on her in 2016 called The Kitchen Wisdom of Cecilia Chiang. She recently passed away at the age of 100 years old in October of 2020. She is credited as the person who introduced authentic Chinese cuisine and practices to American diners, and also that diners should experiment, educate themselves, and bend to Asian cuisine, not the other way around.
Yes, please.
And that is it.
Okay, now I have to look it up because she just died.
She did.
4 months ago. So it's still possible that it was Cecilia Chiang that I saw on, and is it CEC?
It's CHIANG.
Oh, the Chang is, but Cecilia is
CECILIA. Cecilia.
Let's see here. That's her. I definitely recognize
she's on
her.
there?
I definitely recognize her. I swear it's Taste the Nation. I am correct.
It's her and her granddaughter?
Yeah, I think it was her granddaughter on there. Yeah, Taste, and it's the episode that's called "What Is Chop Suey Anyway?" It's episode number 5, and that was Padma Lakshmi's. If you haven't watched Taste the Nation, it is fucking fantastic. If you're into food, if you're into culture, into how food and culture mix, and how in America
and how diverse it is,
there is so much food that's been brought from other cultures. It's such a good show. Anyway, yep, that's her.
That's her. Well, there's so many videos out there. I did buy the documentary, The Soul of a Banquet, and watched it. And her preparation of food is so delicate and slow. There's just care throughout the whole thing instead of just trying to blow through something.
I seriously think we should do a series of videos of some of these chefs that we've talked about. Like, you know, we've both talked about like 3 or 4 chefs.
Yeah. Try and make something.
I also think that I've been giving some short shrift to Alice Waters, and I think at some point in the near future, I will do Alice Waters. make amends.
I didn't know who she was.
Yeah, well, I only know her from, you know, reading. Like, she wrote the foreword to Edna Lewis's The Taste of Country Cooking.
Oh, okay.
And so I literally just read her words the other day.
Well, all of my info came from a New York Times obituary by William Grimes, NPR, Cecilia Chiang, who revolutionized American Chinese food by Netta Ulabi.
Netta Ulabi.
Ulabi? Is it Ulabi or
yes,
Ulabi?
Ulabi. I listened to her a lot on the radio. I'm Netta Ulabi.
PBS Food interviewed by Momo Chang. Eater San Francisco article, Bay Area culinary icon Cecilia Chiang dies at 100 by Ev Beatty. An obit from NBC News by Scott Stump. A documentary, The Soul of a Banquet by Wayne Wang. And then another New York Times article, Cecilia Chiang, a pioneering restaurateur, makes a century of flavors by Tejal Rao.
Oh,
and that is it.
Nice job, Rita.
This was a fun one because honestly, Chinese food, I know that I know that I have not had
real
what it could be.
Yeah. I know you had that. We had that conversation about the word authentic. Mm-hmm. But in this case, I feel like I'm being genuine. Like I don't know what Chinese food that isn't Americanized tastes like.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't even know if anybody here does it.
I don't either. And I do appreciate that she tried to teach as many people as she could to try to continue on that tradition, because she also spoke of, because of the communist regime over there, a lot of the chefs were, I mean, they didn't want teachers. They didn't want artists. They didn't want chefs.
People who would like have creativity.
Exactly. And so a lot of that food culture died. And so for her to be able to like sustain it in a way was beautiful.
So I mentioned that I was going to just briefly bring up Chinese food in Montana.
Yeah, what's that about?
And that's because when I moved to Spokane, we wanted to get some Americanized Chinese food takeout, right? We have still not found a single place in this entire city that can make some just good old-fashioned, greasy Americanized Chinese food. No one makes it well here. And I would go back to Montana and I'd be like, oh, this is it. This is so good. And what I didn't know until I grew up a little bit is that Montana has a very long and storied history with Chinese food. In fact, the oldest continuously running Chinese food in the country is in Butte, Montana.
What?
And that is because, unfortunately, through semi-slave labor, Chinese people were forced to build the railroad.
Oh, okay.
Butte, at the same time, became a very big mining town. Mm-hmm. So a lot of Chinese people who were building the railroad saw it as an opportunity to leave the railroad, which was being built to Seattle. Mm-hmm. So they were going through Butte on the way to Seattle. So there are a few pockets along that route where Chinese people ended up being able to leave. And Butte is one of the last ones. So there were quite a few Chinese people who left the the railroad to become miners. So Butte is like Chinese and Irish.
That's a really odd mix.
It is, but again, it's one of the oldest. It is the oldest continuously open Chinese restaurant in the country.
That is crazy.
It's called the Pekin Parlor.
Nice.
And I've eaten there, and it's fucking fantastic. There's a plethora of great Chinese food in Butte. That's what I ate on St. Patrick's Day, which is just this odd amalgamation of American culture right there.
Well, I hope some of the information timelines were skewed by 2 years, 1 year or something. So I really hope that I got the timeline as good as I possibly could. I do know her son is still alive. Her granddaughter's alive.
Yes.
Her daughter. So if I messed up anything, I'm sorry.
And, as we've learned before with the case of Elsa Blankstead and others, they may very well listen to this episode. So
yes,
we do our best and we do our research and we come as well prepared as we possibly can be. And hopefully I thought it was great. Personally,
awesome.
I thought it was great. I was fascinated. I was witnessing the whole thing like it was a movie.
All right. Well, we would like to thank our editor also for his money input that he's going to put in later. Lucas.
Yes. Thank you, Lucas. And also to Jennifer Finch of L7, who, by the way, I don't know if we've ever mentioned this before, but we continuously get a notification every single week when our posts pop up that our YouTube version of our show gets blocked in a certain amount of countries because of L7's song Shirley, which is on the Hungry for Stink album, gets blocked in Cuba, Iran, North Korea every week. So congrats to L7 for being so badass they get just straight up banned.
Awesome.
Yeah. So we do too then by proxy. We get banned.
Oh, well. We're fine.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget that you can follow us on Instagram. You can find our merchandise on TeePublic, and you can support us on Patreon.
All right. Till next time, folks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
What is the song you sing to your cat?
I sing to her, lady, from the moment I saw you. I sing that to her all the time. Well, let me clear my throat out.
Let me clear my throat. No. Sorry.
Can we auto-tune that?
Lucas, auto-tune us.
Auto-tune us. Our vocal fry.
Where are we?
I was going to sing something, but I'm not going to. It's a song that I sing to my cat.
Who originally sang that? Is that Lionel Richie?
No. Lucas, who sings that? You're my lady. That one. It's like super operatic. But I sing that to my cat all the time and she just puts her ears back.
She is protesting.
Very much so.
Okay, for real now. Who do you got for me?